John Viega is the CEO of Crash Override, and Mark Curphey is the CMO. John and Mark have a long history in application security, from authoring the first ever book on the topic, founding OWASP in 2002, and the Software Security Project in 2023. They recently founded two successful application security companies, SourceClear and Capsule8. John and Mark join us to talk about Chalk, the problems it solves, and what chalk marks provide for developers, and also to share thoughts on the Zap move to the Software Security Project. We hope you enjoy this conversation with John and Mark.
Are you struggling to measure the effectiveness of your secure code training? You're not alone. That's why we're proud to share that on average, Security Journey learners increase their knowledge an average of 33 and as much as 85%. Our diverse training content satisfies a variety of adult learning styles, from conversational training videos to hands-on secure coding activities, ensuring that learners are engaged no matter their learning style. Visit securityjourney.com to try our training today.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Application Security Podcast. This is Chris Romeo. I'm the CEO of Curve Ventures and joined by my good friend, Robert Hurlbut. Hey, Robert.
Hey, Chris. Yeah, Robert Hurlbut. I'm a principal application security architect and threat modeling lead over at Acquia, and really good to be here today with you and our guests.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation. We have Mark Curphey, who's been with us before. It's talked a lot about the history of OWASP and things that kind of filled us in on a lot of that. But we're going to talk about something different today, at least to start, as far as the open source project that they've been working towards. But first, let's jump in and introduce John Viega. John, we always like to hear people's security origin story as a way to kind of just jump into the deep end really fast. So how'd you get into this world of application security?
Totally an accident. So I was in grad school doing compilers and programming languages, and then decided I needed to go to the real world. Got a job at a company that at the time was called RST, working for a guy named Gary McGraw, and ended up doing a bunch of, that was all security work. So took my compiler knowledge to build like the first static analysis tools for security, and including like the first open source ones, and like also wrote the first book with Gary for developers on security, did a bunch of books after that, but also was doing a lot of cryptography. So I did the GCM encryption mode that is the default for TLS and is basically in hardware everywhere. And then I put on a suit and sold out for a while, I guess. And but I guess so. I met Mark when he was founding OWASP because the book Building Secure Software had come out like less than a year before, and he reached out to when he was founding OWASP. So I was like joined the original tech advisory board with Weissopel and Hoagland and so on, and you know, I didn't stay around for very long, but I've stayed very close to Mark throughout the years. And even as I kind of left AppSec, I stayed close with Mark. So.
Very cool. And so I want to kind of dive in to our conversation here with a philosophical statement, because as I was looking at what you guys are doing now, and I know we're going to unpack that quite a bit more, I found this interesting statement that you put out, and I want to understand this better. And it was this idea that devs can't see into production, SREs can't see into development or production, and security can't see either. And so I'm looking at that and I'm like, wait, isn't that why DevOps was created originally? Like, are there silos that exist that people just have lost track of or think don't even exist. And so I'd love to get either one of you just jump in on this one and give us some thoughts about what is the state of siloing in development.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that they're intentional silos, but they're de facto silos the bigger companies get. So basically the origin story for this project is Mark and I were both, kind of semi-retired and wondering like, let's solve some problem that people have. And we went and interviewed a ton of people to understand what problems they do have. And this is like kind of the first lowest common denominator. We saw like a lot of people getting hung up on information they needed that they didn't know how to find or didn't know the people who owned it. And so even in big tech companies that have like, great SREs, we'd still have CISOs saying, oh yeah, well, or not even just CISOs, but, people throughout the org saying, yeah, there was an incident in production yesterday and it took us like 2 hours to figure out who owned the code and which version of the code we were looking at. And, so like in really big companies, you might never be able to get the answer. Those people have left, are not sure which build it is, like all sorts of things that really provide friction. And like just from a security perspective, works the other way too. Like you might want to say, okay, well, I've done all this. There's my static analysis tool as a new type of vulnerability that it's checking for. And wow, it's giving me tons of alerts across like hundreds of repos. Now, which ones are important? Like what actually gets used here? Which ones are hackathon projects? I don't know. So those were the kinds of problems that we heard, and then we started asking people how they tried to address it and understand what the failures were and kind of get deeper into like how they needed to operationalize things. And that's what kind of led us to the problem, I guess. So.
Yeah. I mean, another way of kind of saying exactly the same thing is that when we were doing these interviews with people, kind of would just say like, what's your biggest AppSec problem? And people basically said, I don't know what to work on now, next or never. Like, I don't know what's the most important thing to work on. We've got a limited amount of resources. I've got a limited amount of team. Even if I had an unlimited budget, I can't hire all the talent because it doesn't exist at scale. I'm flooded by alerts because all the tools are generating alerts. And somehow we've got to figure out, it's not about deduping vulns. It's about what's the most important thing. So when you drill into that, you'd say, well, okay, how do you determine that? And it was literally like someone who goes around with a clipboard and knows that this application is facing the internet and it's managing PII or you get these stories kind of like that. And so kind of ultimately what that led us to figure out is if you want to go solve that problem, you have to understand the end-to-end software engineering process and all the pieces about it, and then you can make an informed decision. So, the way I like to describe Chalk is basically it's telemetry and observability for the security engineering process, right? So you can, collect put the telemetry in for everything from when the developer creates the code to when it's built to when it's deployed, and then you can go and observe what's happening. So as an example, we've got a gaming company that are kind of an early design partner. They got 6,300 repos. Dependabot runs on every single one. They don't know which ones are hackathon projects, but I can tell you that all 6,300 are not deployed. So, how do I go focus on the 100 that are deployed? Because the first thing I've got to know is which 100 are deployed. And then within those 100, like which ones are managing PII, which ones aren't. And then when I figure out I've got a vuln in the one that is managing PII in production, who owns the code for it, right? Who do I go talk to? But even things like I've now found a vuln in this app that was scanned in production by a DAS tool or something, what actually was the commit that was built and is pushed on that? Because it may actually be the wrong one in the first place. It may be one that's been fixed. Or, hey, the developer said that there's a fix here, like the actual fix has not been deployed yet. So what we realized is that you can have a massive impact instead of like trying to figure out to dedupe farms, like get rid of 90% of them in the first place, because it doesn't matter. Like these are repos that aren't even being used or aren't important and things like that, right?
Yeah, it was really like we watch people's decision-making processes and what info didn't they have and what could be done to kind of automate that without friction. And so like a lot of it was connecting the dots between data silos and, again, for a developer, that is important too, to Mark's point. Like, okay, let's say that there was a big production issue and like you want to know which version of the software that was actually deployed over there, which the developer often doesn't know. And even if you do, if you're that removed from the operational environment and you're trying to reproduce something and people don't want you in production, sure would be nice if you had telemetry about what in the environment was like that it was running in and what it was talking to and like what else was on the node that might actually impact the bug you're seeing. And none of that stuff is going to be easy to get either. So that was a clear, huge problem, and then tackling it in a way that was going to be seamless, as frictionless as possible for people, like easy to just kind of stick it in and forget about it until you need it. That's really what kind of the motivation has been, because we looked at listened to a lot of people tell their stories about what they tried, and we learned that like pretty much any friction is enough to derail it. So
certainly the what you've just laid out is an enterprise class problem. But when I think about this, what you're describing as far as the problem space, I think it still exists in even small companies and even startups, that having that visibility into what code is where and what code's produced. So when you think about this problem space, and maybe you heard from some people as well that you interviewed, is this something that smaller companies and startups suffer from, and they could benefit from the same approach?
Yeah, 100%. Like we've for instance, around spend management, we've heard a lot of startups say, well, like anybody can spin anything up anywhere. And we're probably spending on a bunch of stuff that we don't know that we're spending on and don't have the visibility. So, or like they want to get more telemetry from the app in production and don't have a good way to do that without totally re-architecting it. And those are all like things that we're doing or looking to do with as Chalk evolves. For instance, like in the serverless world, like we can, that's a very constrained environment, and doing any kind of debugging in a production world is not that fun. It is what we've heard from a lot of people, and we're going to be doing everything we can to make it a lot easier to get kind of that info out. And then on the other end of the scale with the enterprises, you're right. I mean, it's definitely a lot of these problems are enterprise problems. But we were really shocked as we started like bringing around an early prototype, how like even the biggest companies that talk about it as if they've got the problem licked don't. So for instance, financial institutions, they've got regulatory requirements to track all this stuff. And so when we were talking to them, we thought they'd say, oh, this isn't the tool we'd ever use. But it was kind of the opposite. It was like, well, all that's like manually by spreadsheet. And, do you know Fred? He's like 12 buildings away, and he's only works 2 days a week. So good luck getting that info. So, and it's out of date anyway. So like we've been pretty surprised at how like big opportunity there is to kind of make people's lives better at all sorts of companies.
Yeah, I mean, two kind of related stories. So we're like tiny as 10 of us, right? But one of our front end engineers has started using it. So, when you put code into CI/CD, magic happens, right? So like, and all of a sudden he's like, well, I actually don't know what version of library is actually running in production. Like I kind of know what was running locally, but I can't replicate production to go figure out what happens. So it's kind of interesting from that perspective. And a lot of developers have that. When John and I were doing the interviews, this was a great story. Like the whole Log4j thing when we first started doing it was kicking off. And there was one person that was just like jaded by this thing because they literally had to send someone around trying to figure out what was running in production. So the SCA tool, of course, like runs on a repo and says, you've got this version of this. And they have like, first of all, don't know which of those repos are deployed into prod. Secondly, the CI/CD is so complex that it wasn't just taking a piece of code. It was optimizing it, pulling in containers from other things, and then figuring out how to deploy it. And then even when they've got now hundreds of those things, which ones do they go tackle first? Like they're dealing with this urgent problem. And that was a really interesting one because literally they were deploying people like to go figure it out. And they were like, wouldn't you'd much rather be able to go query a set of metadata and figure that out instantly. Like when we realized that, again, comes back to this, like, what do I do now, next, or never? In order to answer those questions, you got to have loads of telemetry back. It's kind of like log files, right? Like, I really want to figure out what's going on. I've got to have all the log files and then go answer the questions. But the question may not be preconceived until I know what I want to go and answer, right?
So we have an understanding about what Chalk is, a telemetry tool, and some of the problems it solves. But is this also helpful for security professionals as well? And maybe what's different maybe for them versus developers and the data they're getting?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, look, imagine you're scanning all your repos with some SaaS tool, right? Or you're running an SCA tool across all your repos. Like 90% of them, you just kill in the first place. I don't even need to go look at them to figure out whether they're important. Like, I don't need to be scanning these things because they're not even important repos or not in prod. So like, those are some of the important things. Other things are, look, I got an app in production. Like I can tell from the telemetry, this thing goes and connects to a relational database. Like, oh, that's probably managing PII. So again, like in all that prioritization stuff. And then other types of scenarios that you've got an inventory of who owns the code. So now I've got an incident, right, that happens. Like I know that it's on this machine. I can then tie it back to this repo, which I could never do before. And now I also spit out the list of the owners. Great. Let me go talk to them. But you can also do things like, for instance, a fix has already been put onto this branch and it's a fix for this issue. Great. I actually know that someone is fixing this thing and I can track it and make sure that the fix was actually deployed to production and that it's gone. So again, that's sort of like closing the loop of here's the incident. Now I go figure out how to run it more efficiently or track down that the issue is actually being closed, right?
And putting on my cynical old man hat, like for people that really are just about ticking boxes, that like the Chalk is also really great for that too, because like you can do first like SaaS scans, like it'll run semgrep automatically on everything, collect S-bombs automatically for everything, digitally sign everything for you with SigStore, and like package that with the software artifacts wherever they go too. So like without anybody having to do anything if they don't want to, like it can, everything, including the key management, can be like fully like automated. Don't ever worry about it. So like we're pretty agnostic about what metadata gets collected. It's make as much available as people want, and bundle it in a way where you can send it anywhere you want, but also you're always going to be able to tie it back to the artifact. So the actual chalk mark and the artifact will tie it back to the data that you collected, but you could also just like jam all the data you want into the chalk mark if you really wanted to as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do things you can enrich the data. So, like as an example, if I know this data is pushed onto an EC2 instance, I can then enrich it with cloud info. So I can say, this code is actually deployed into Europe, right? As an example, or this code is deployed into this account. So that account happens to be, shared services account. So again, once you got that data, enriching it with other info is also kind of interesting for more context.
Originally, I was gonna describe this based on what I've learned so far as an observability tool for the CI/CD pipeline, but then based on John's description of generating signatures for packages and doing some of these other things, it's almost like a Swiss Army knife for the CI/CD pipeline. I'm kind of marketing on the fly for you here, but I'm trying to wrap my head around what is this thing.
And it can live in production too. So for instance, if you've got if you're doing you build everything through Docker, let's say, like Chalk can transparently wrap Docker. So you think you're calling Docker, you're really calling Chalk, and it will then take your existing, if you wanted to, will take your existing entry point, make sure that it still gets called and that it's still PID1, but that it also spawns a version of Chalk that will report on the runtime environment and even kind of beacon periodically if you want to. And we're working towards, we've done a lot of work towards being able to send back kind of on-demand data, essentially monitor for events in applications and push them as they happen. So that's not going to be in the first releases, but it's definitely coming down the pipe.
So scenarios there, maybe look, you're actually running Log4j and it's making egress calls out to something, as an example, right? The telemetry thing, Chris, is kind of interesting. So what Joel kind of mentioned, semgrep and SBOMs and things like that is, there's a whole set of telemetry you can just collect with the chalk binary. But if there's other pieces that are missing, you can go spin up your own collection piece that you want to do. I mean, you can define manifest metadata that you want to collect that we can collect, but there may be other things that either you want to collect in a particular format or sophisticated ways of doing it, like running a SAS tool or whatever. So orchestrating those and allowing those to collect that data is that piece, which is cool as well.
So the $1 million question is, what is the performance impact if I run Chalk in production?
Negligible. In CI/CD, it's also negligible unless you are doing the SBOM or SAS scans. Those things can be expensive, but everything was written with performance and scalability in mind, because my last company, Capsulate, that was our bread and butter, was doing detection and analytics in real time in production infrastructure and big tech companies. So everything is very geared at being as lightweight as possible. Now, when we get to the ability to kind of hook what's going on in an app and stream events back, you're going to have costs that are associated with how much data you ask for potentially, but we know how to make sure that you can cap those things well and handle it gracefully when you do, essentially. So all those things are but for what's there now, collecting data during CI/CD, collecting data in production, it is ridiculously fast. We're using, we're essentially everything's statically compiled with a type safe systems language, and you're getting like C performance on everything.
What platforms or frameworks are supported initially?
Yeah, as well.
Yeah. So the intent, like we're more focused on Linux production systems at the moment. So like be it x86 or ARM, things do work on the Mac. They might work in like a WSL environment, but we're not really working on that. Then it's a question of what kinds of artifacts can we chalk and what kind of data, like what do we connect to collect data from? We've got basically any ELF executable, anything that is even a remotely common scripting language. The Docker world, there would be some gaps in on the edges, but 90% of what's common with like Docker, probably 99% we'd handle. And then when you get beyond that, there are things that a lot of what we're doing will kind of work naturally in a serverless environment, but we need to do more work that's like specific to the serverless environments. And also like we have a way to do like the same stuff with JavaScript in the browser and we think there's some good use cases for that, but it's not anything more than like a roadmap item at this point. Okay. It's still pretty comprehensive for like the Linux world. The data collection side, there's a lot more we want to do, but I think that a lot of the roadmap there is going to be driven on what's most important by people and whether other people feel like they want to like roll up their sleeves and help us with it, or because eventually we'll shift our focus to more like figuring out what we're going to do as a commercial business, then instead of like just building cool open source on investors' time. So so
strike
at some point,
strike that from the podcast, John.
No, it's fine. It's fine. They'll live.
So one more question about Chalk then. How do I get events from it? Like, is it what protocols, what message formats is it sending outbound to advise me about what's happening in production?
Yeah. So everything that it outputs is just like JSON, and then there are built-in connectors for like, you want to set up a place to HTTP post to, or write stuff in an S3 bucket, or log stuff to like a rotating log file. Like there are essentially output syncs for all of those things that you can configure, sending whatever data you want wherever you want. It always is going to be in JSON, we'll probably end up adding more kind of sync types based on what people find valuable. Like, for instance, for object storage, we do S3, but we don't do any of the other cloud providers because we don't have credits on those cloud providers. So they should get done at some point. So
okay,
you could ultimately dump it in Splunk or
anywhere,
Backstage, wherever you want.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll end up building like more specific connectors, but it's just really easy to kind of generically get stuff out either in like JSON log files or via like just an HTTP post, anywhere. So like there are a million like things we would like to have specific integrations for, but we started with the Swiss Army knife, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. So let's change gears a little bit here, and want to get Mark's thoughts on the Zapp's move to the Software Security Foundation, kind of get some perspective, because I think a lot of folks in our community are trying to figure this out, trying to understand what's happening right now between OWASP and Software Security Foundation. And so, Mark, you're the source.
Sure.
So I wanted to get your take.
Yeah,
Software
Security
Project.
Project. No. So under Linux Foundation and all that. So, when I ran for the board for OWASP last year, it was kind of on this manifesto change. A lot of people want to change, rightly so. OWASP does a lot of things really, really good and always has, but it's very much kind of bottoms up. And when that means anyone can go start anything. And so, 300 projects there, some of which are amazing, Cyclone and Zap and other things. Some of which less so, right? Some of which haven't been touched for 13 years, as an example. So OWASP philosophy was like, that's it. Have at it. Let people sift through it all. I think that's challenging for a developer who we already know doesn't really care about security. Like, how do they come to a place and find out these are the best tools for the job? That's not what OWASP does. Same with documentation and guidance, right? You got 3 or 5 of everything. So there was this kind of conflict, right, around what I thought and what a bunch of other people thought wanted to happen versus what the rest of the OWASP board thought, or most of the OWASP board wanted to happen. The same was true of the governance model, right? So my take on it is that, and for the most part, all of the people in governance are basically vendors, right? And consultants. And so in general, OWASP people build stuff for themselves. And if you're a consultant or a thing, that's fine. You scratch your own itch. But when it comes to things like, could we build training that is free training for the world? Not necessarily in everyone's best interests, right? To go do that. And so you've got a set of conflicts. And for my take, I would much rather have Google, Microsoft, GitHub, the big boys, putting big money in to go move big rocks. And some other people kind of said that was a conflict. Well, I'd much rather have, someone with lots of money having an opinion than someone with no money having an opinion. My take. So, when it's very clear very early on that thing was just not going to change, right? And so, basically, kind of said, great, let's go figure out a different model. And there was this open letter from a lot of the flagship projects, and they basically said, look, as we've grown, things like Zap as an example, we want to go work on this thing full time, but we get no support from OWASP. Like, there's no one managing our GitHub, there's no one managing sponsors, we're managing it all ourselves, and we want to go build software. So great, let me figure out how to go create something which is different. And so absolutely the hope is, OWASP stays the same and does what it is good at. And then the software security project is a different governance model, a different model of how we're going to do things. And the two absolutely, hopefully, will work side by side, and we'll both do great things. So there is absolutely zero, intention. And in fact, I work hard to make sure that OWASP doesn't collapse. Like, it can't. But there's definitely a bunch of problems that they have to go solve over there. Otherwise, things are not going to resolve. And I think it's appropriate to be open and honest about that as well. So, the advantage of working under the Linux Foundation is that you have huge amounts of reach, right? So, a KubeCon, 6,000 people or whatever attend KubeCon. You got OSCon, you got OSSF, you got all of these foundations with all of the big players in. And if you want to expose software security to the masses, that's the place to go do it, right? The ecosystem already exists. So that's why it was a really great place to go, do it and make it happen. And we're still in the process of actually figuring out how that governance works, because we've got to take the best of different models, right? We want to make sure that the community can be involved. We want to make sure that the big tech companies can be involved, but we got to figure out, like, what's the balance to make sure that, neither the vendors, the tech vendors, the security vendors, the security consultants can steer it in the way that they want, nor can the big people steer it in the way they want. We've got to make it conducive to people putting a lot of money in, so we can do a lot of big projects. And we've got to make sure that the things that we're going to do are the things that are meaningful. So, as an example, the OWASP top 10 has always been criticized because it's driven off of scanning data, right? For the most part, not entirely, but for the most part. Well, that's circular causation, right? Like, tool goes and finds these issues, then they become the most important issues. You then train the consultants to go find those same issues. And if you go talk to our CISOs, they'll say they're not the biggest issues at all. They are the most found scanning issues. So, a good example of that is we're picking off 2 projects initially. One is going to be a top 10 driven by CISOs. It's like, what is the DevSecOps top 10? What are the top 10 things that we care about the most? So that allows consultants, vendors, and everyone else to align and say, let's go help you solve those problems, versus the vendor saying, these are the things that you should care about. And the CISO saying it's not. So hopefully we can kind of shift the conversation to these are the most important things that the people that are trying to secure stuff are saying, hey, let's go help them work on those things. And then the second one that we're working on is a DevSecOps pipeline, a reference architecture. So as you know, a lot of kind of people will say, you need this. And it's very reminiscent of the early days of OWASP when people were saying, like, these are things you should care about, and et cetera. Well, let's get collectively people together and say, this is how you build a pipeline. These are the pieces that are in there. You've got version control, your cloud configs, you've got to have secrets management, you've got to have these different pieces in there. And then we're going to build an open source reference implementation of that. So that's kind of it. We're going to take our time and make sure that the governance model gets properly done, because if it doesn't, we'll hit a bunch of other things, and make sure that all the people that want to be involved can, from people that want to put a lot of money in, people that want to put their time in, right the way out the spec. So yeah, that's where it is. And then with respect to Zap, I mean, look, Zap, they're amazing guys. Like, that thing has so much reach. It's like, I think they estimated it's like 70,000 people use the thing. Like, there were 10 million Docker pulls last month. Like, that scale is insane. And here was a tool that everyone is relying on, but was collapsing. And again, OWASP, the OWASP leadership decided not to go figure out how to get this thing funded. Either decided not to, or unable to go do it. So I did it. And we've managed to get on board so far Simon Bennett and Ricardo, who are working on it full time. And as SSP goes, like, we'll hopefully try and build a team of about 10 people working on it full time, and fully open source, free for everyone. So everyone's going to get commercial grade open source tool. Now, we've absolutely got to find a way to make that sustainable, because there's loads of people making money off of it. There are people embedding that into commercial tools that are making millions off the thing and not contributing back. So absolutely, as part of it as well is, let's figure out a way to make sustainable open source projects financially sustainable. And then we can go and apply the model to other things, because we know there's a load of other people that want to go work on them full time, and then the tide rises for everyone, right? So yeah, that's, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it's actually very helpful. John, I think you're on mute here.
Yeah, I forgot I did that because my daughter was leaving for college in the background. But one of the things that I've been impressed with the Zap team is that they really are focused on doing the right thing. They don't want to go start the commercial company. They just want to build their project. And if it's something like Zap where the industry needs it, we need to have support infrastructure, the nonprofits like OWASP and SSP. That's really, we need to make sure that people like that can be successful, that people that just want to raise the bar for everybody else and help, if they're going to do a good job, can do that for a living and not have to feel like they have to go build like $1 billion company. So.
Yeah. I mean, to give you an idea, there's so many amazing things that the Zap guys want to do. So like, one example is, when you run a DAS tool, it's incredibly noisy, right? And you don't really know where to go point the thing. Well, imagine if you have a code base and you have an open source static analysis tool that knows where the endpoints are, and then you can go highly target the endpoints. Amazing. Plus, you go scan this from the outside and you know where the code back is, because you know all of those things. Like, these are things that they want to do, but they were unable to do with the resources they had. And so, everyone's going to get all those sort of things in the right way, as John said. I mean,
that's excellent.
There are commercially supported open source core things, Jork, SemGrep, other loads of things like that, which are great. But there are other things that just frankly just need the money, and there's a way to go get it for them. So so we're able to do it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's always those folks I always think of them as so noble because, like you said, like they could go start a company and
Totally.
they could and people would line up to give them money because you've got a 10-year track record of building this thing for nothing with no money.
But a venture capitalist rocks up with 70,000 existing users, and that, exactly, it would just be like, more startups would just beg for that. But
I mean, they get a blank check handed to them. You just fill in what you need because we know you know how to get things done for limited money. Here, just fill in what you need.
And then but if they go the Zap route and choose not to do that, then they will end up feeling screwed because successful projects like Zap, to Mark's point, there are like a dozen commercial products that use Zap under the hood and aren't contributing back even to the code base. Never mind, sharing some of the love with the people that build this thing that drives revenue for them. So it's definitely
I mean,
a problem to solve.
I sound cool. We've got to figure out how to make it fair, right? If you're making money off it, you need to fairly contribute back into it. I was sat on a call with I won't name and shame them here, but I will name and shame them if they don't do the right thing. They are making $300 million a year selling their AppSec tools, and they tried to tell me on a phone call that they were being fair, contributing 25 grand back. That's not fair. That's not okay for you to go do that. The economics of open source are great. You build one thing once, everyone gets to embed it. It's a great community. You get to extend it, all of that. But if it's on the back of someone like Simon, Ricardo, Rick, who are doing all the work and you're just, draining them dry of all the money, that's not okay. So we've got to help figure out what that sustainable open source model is so that we can incubate and other things which are, are going to be great for everyone. Yeah.
Does SSP, is part of SSP going to be going after those folks if they don't do the right thing? Do you have the ability to go after them?
I mean, technically I'm sure, but I won't, and that's not the intent. But the intent is let's build a model where we can hold them accountable, and we can make those people sustainably. We can make those projects sustainable, and we can provide them with all the resources, payroll, legal, IT, and management, so they can spend their time building software, which is what they want to do. I don't know. There's a different options we're kind of exploring. One may be changing the license to GPL so these people can't embed it without doing it and dual license it, which allows every individual. I don't know whether that's just one option to explore, right? We'll have to look at all the different things, but we want to figure out how to. Obviously, it's 100% going to stay open source. There's no question around that not being the case, but we've got to figure out how to make it financially sustainable. And there's all these other people making money, so we've got to figure out how to get the fair trade going. And exactly how that happens is TBD.
Yeah. I mean, and you want to avoid lawyers and courts and things like that. Companies just need to do the right thing based on, if you're building a business on top of an existing open source project, there's got to be an equitable percentage that everybody can agree on that says if you're making 300 million from commercializing an open source project as the core of your engine, I don't know what the percentage is, but $25,000 into 300 million is a very tiny number. I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
It's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous.
It's not even covering one person. It's not even covering Simon working for SSP. So there's got to be, and hopefully vendors will come around to helping you figure out what that number is. Because I think, at the end of the day, I'm somebody that always believes as a vendor, and I'm a vendor. I've had companies, I have new companies. We should just do the right thing. That's what I try to do. And I think you guys are the same. You guys are the same mindset. We just do the right thing. There is a right thing to do and there's a wrong thing to do. And the wrong thing to do is to give somebody $25,000 and then make 300 million on it. I don't think anybody, it's going to be tough for somebody to make an argument with me that says, no, that's the right thing to do. And I know Mark, you said they tried to, but I'm not buying it. Like I'm not buying it.
The irony is two PR people, two expensive PR people were on the call, right? It's like,
there's 25 grand right there, right? In retainer and hourly fees, and they had to prep for the call and everything else. And I know I'm probably.
But again, my hope is, Zap was an important project. We needed to do this for them now, but I hope we could use that as a blueprint for other ones as well, because it is really important. There are really, really important tools, really important technology that's being developed, and so we've got to do it for the other stuff as well. So that'll be part of what we're doing is building the model, proving it out with Zap, and then we can take it to other things and figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, my hope is OWASP wakes up coming out of this experience, like for real. I mean, Robert and I are both lifetime members. Mark, you started the thing. John, you were there in the early days. Like we all love this thing. We don't have bad feelings towards it, and I don't think. I mean, Mark, you don't either. Like you
absolutely no. I had dinner with Andrew Vanderstock last week, who I absolutely love. He's just fantastic. But the board needs to wake up, and they need to start listening, and they need to start listening for a project and understanding what's going on. And until that happens, unfortunately, nothing's going to change. Yeah, I mean, SSP was created because it had to be. I think that's kind of sad in many ways, right?
And to everybody out there, there's 4 board seats open on the OWASP board in the upcoming elections. So, if you're listening to this conversation, you're like, yeah, things need to change. You've got an opportunity right now for a collection of people to go in and, four like-minded people could shake this thing up quite extensively. So, Let's transition towards our lightning round. Robert has become the keeper of the lightning round. And so, Robert, let's take these guys through the lightning round, please.
Okay. So, John and Mark. So I'll start with John. What's your most controversial opinion on application security, and why do you hold this view?
That it's nowhere near as important as the security industry thinks that it is. I don't know. I mean, just because I listen to people that aren't in security and what drives them is different. And I think that application security is important, but it's got to be easy. Otherwise, it's never going to be done well enough. So, and most people in the security industry are like, as secure as possible at all costs, and that's not really the right answer.
Okay. Mark, same question.
Developers don't care about security. And I think it's genuinely true. I'd love them to. I've watched loads of people kind of say, hey, we've got to figure out how to make them, but I don't believe they do. I mean, that's one of the things I have this fundamental belief. If you're going to build tools, you've got to build tools that provide developer value and security value. And by developer value, I don't mean if they need to solve a side project of security, but developers won't install security tools unless they're absolutely forced to, because they don't want to do it. So, yeah, I think when we accept they don't care about security, you got to figure out other ways to get them to do it.
Makes sense. Mark, we'll start with you on the next one. What would it say if you could display a single message on a billboard at the RSA or Black Hat conference?
I'm going to screw John. I'm going to go chalk everything.
Great. And John, same
Sorry,
question.
Sorry, John.
Yeah, I don't have any message that I would ever
put out there.
Probably just say YOLO. I don't know.
Excellent. Okay. Back to you, John. What's your top book recommendation for those interested in security, and why do you find it valuable?
Oh, great question. Nothing that I've written because it's 20 years too old. Boy, I would say that Eugene Spafford's new book is really good and would be good for people getting in. I just have not spent a lot of time in books in the last few years, so that's probably the only one that I would go to. Yeah.
Okay, Great.
Mine would be two books that aren't security books, but I say this to security people, and they're fairly old. One is Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore, which is a classic product management book. But what it talks about is how do you take things from early adopters and how do you figure out what requirements are needed so that you can get mass adoption on things. And there's so many lessons that can be learned around how that can be applied to security. So I think that's extremely, extremely important. The other one would be pragmatic marketing, probably in similar ways, but John's a big pragmatic marketing person. But it really just teaches you to listen about what people want and how to go solve problems for them. And I think a lot of the security industry tells people this is your problem and here's how you need to go solve it, versus listening to someone about what the actual problem is and how they would like to go solve it and then building on the solution for it. And I think pragmatic marketing does a really good job of taking a step back. So
yeah, I guess if the question's more what books should security people read, then the answer is definitely not security books. It's how they can learn about the rest of the ecosystem they play in, and so certainly for product people, those are great books. But even for people that don't want to build products, I'm sure that learning about the other, whatever the key texts are for other roles in the org that you deal with are really useful. Like, especially at the CISO level, I think that there's still a lot of CISOs that are that don't see themselves as business executives, and they would be better serving companies and customers if they thought of themselves not just as like the security executive, but part of the broader leadership team trying to help the company meet its goals, not just meet the security goals. So.
Yeah. That's very helpful, though. It's I always love book recommendations that are outside of security, because often security people, we spend too much time with the tunnel vision on what we think is important. But, there's so many lessons we can learn from other disciplines, which then you're like, wow, this really applies to security as well, because it's.
I got one more for you then.
Okay.
I'm a huge cyclist, and it's about Team Sky, and I forget what the name of it is, but you can put it in the notes. And the concept of the book is about how Team Sky, which was a cycling team, basically went to win the Tour de France in 5 years. And it was based on a concept called marginal gains. So when it first started, people would joke, like they would take pillows to races so their cyclists had better sleep and everything. And the theory of the book, which goes through, is like you make a 1% change and you make it 100 times and you're 100% better. And I think that is so true, that people try and find all these big paradigm shifts and things. But if you're incrementally making things better, it doesn't take long before things have completely changed. So that's a great book, because it goes through the whole story of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll find we'll put these in the show notes so folks can find them. And you gave me a couple things to add to my reading list here too. So
yeah, definitely.
I always appreciate that. This question is somewhat selfish. It's not really for the rest. It's not really for the audience. It's really for us to.
All right. Well, we should ask you then. Come on. What's your book recommendations?
Oh man. I mean, what just happened here? Wait, this is our podcast. Hold on, Mark. You can't just turn the
you can't turn it around.
Oh boy. Let's see. I mean, one of my classics that I recommend to people often is called Start With Why, because it's the author's name is slipping my mind for some reason, but it's so often in all disciplines we jump into trying to solve the problem versus stopping back and saying, why do people care about this? And so that's one of my primary ones. It's kind of a paradigm shifter, because it helps you to see there's different ways to solve problems versus just using what you already know. By asking a lot of why questions, it's a discipline to really understand, are we solving the right problem? Do we even understand the problem? And so that's one of my all-time favorite ones. Robert, I'll put you on the spot now since Mark put me on the spot. Come on.
Yeah, that's a tough. I was going to say the one that John mentioned, I've been looking at recently, and so that's probably the one I would say at the moment that I would recommend people take a look at.
Yeah, cool. Sorry. Quick key takeaway here for our audience. 30 seconds maximum. Mark, you go ahead and go first. Key takeaway.
if you understand everything happening in your software engineering process, you can make informed decisions, and decisions should be made on an informed basis. So, yeah.
Excellent. John?
Well, that sums it up well. But for the conversation at the end here, I'd also add, it's really about getting in the heads of everybody else, and not call it. Should not take an inside-out view of the world. Take an outside-in view of the world.
There's your billboard too. You can put that on the billboard.
Yes.
Take an outside in, look at the world, inside out, look at the world. So, Mark, John, thank you for sharing your insights, your wisdom, your experience with our audience and us as well. We truly appreciate it. We look forward to a future conversation in some period of time for updates on where Chalk is or whatever else you guys are up to. So thanks for being a part of the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us.